Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is episode 4 recap for Genius Game. Wow, what an episode. I think this is probably my favorite episode so far. The main match was really exciting. The death match obviously had a lot of emotion involved with it. I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about this whole episode. So let's get right into it. So to wrap up some stuff from episode 3, I really appreciate everybody who put some positive comments in the last in the last YouTube video. I think I learned that I probably should have waited a day. I should have waited a day before I made the recap from last episode, because as soon as I saw the episode, I felt a little bit raw and tender about the whole thing because it wasn't what I was expecting to see play out on screen. And I think if had I taken a day, I would have had a better perspective and I wouldn't have been so, oh, woe is me in the recap. Because I think the truth is I was being a little bit delusional about how that episode was going to come across. Because I don't think there's any way for them to show code breakers in a way that doesn't make me look controlling and domineering, because I was. So I think I was being a bit delusional to think that that would play out a bit differently. That being said, I do stand by the feeling that I think they portrayed my strategy that episode as being unnecessarily domineering. And I understand why they did that, because they can't really admit how hard that game would have been to play and win with a different strategy. But yeah, I do stand by being a bit disappointed that my strategy that episode wasn't shown in a more impressive kind of way, and it was all just a bit mean and negative. And I think there were people, commenting on that episode and using words like bullying and threatening and that kind of stuff. And I really had to try to take a step back and not get offended by that, because some of the comments did feel a little bit personal. And obviously, I'm somebody who was bullied a lot growing up, so that word in particular has a certain connotation to it. And I don't think I did bully anyone in that game. Like, being scared to go up against me because you might make an enemy of me is totally reasonable, but I never gave anyone the impression that if they did go up against me, that I was going to be really upset, or that I would definitely take them to the death match. The truth is, I was going to take the person to the death match who I thought I had the best chance of beating, whether they were loyal to me or not. So it really wouldn't have mattered whether someone turned on me. I was playing to win, not to get revenge. And it's interesting because you saw in this episode, like, Bedalia immediately says to Amanfi, "I'm taking you to the death match," in a bit more of a way that was about revenge. And that wasn't really how I was playing. But at the same time, I can understand people who are only watching the episode each week because that's all the information they have, sort of leaping to certain conclusions, maybe about how I am as a person or how I am as a player. But you can see from this episode and episode 4 that my strategy was not to go in and dominate and control every single game. I only did that because I had to in that episode. And also, we see from episode 4, where we have a social death match, that I was right to avoid the death match at all costs, because that tactical rock, paper, scissors could have very easily been the death match I would have seen last episode, and I would have gone home. So I feel a little bit vindicated about the last episode. People can have the opinions that they want. I do think this has been a really good learning experience for me, because I think I am probably somebody who's a very sensitive and insecure person. So I think I want everyone to like me and to respect me and to think I'm playing this great game. And it bothers me when people don't feel that way. But I'm also simultaneously playing in some episodes in this aggressive kind of way that is going to be polarizing. So I think there is a certain element of maybe I can dish it, but I can't really take it that well. And that's something for me to take and work on, because I don't think it's a really good quality to have. And also, I've realized that if I'm going to feel a bit sensitive and be more likely to take comments about the show more personally, then I also need to be very careful about the comments I'm making about, other people in the cast and about the show itself, because otherwise that's really hypocritical for me to be contributing to any criticism of people, but then I'm also being really sensitive when people criticize me. So yeah, this has been a really good learning experience for me. Another thing I've been thinking about is that if you're in a position where perhaps you lack some self-awareness, so in my case, for example, thinking for over a year now that episode 3 was going to be my like shining moment and people were going to see how great of a genius I am from that game. Obviously, it didn't play out that way. So if you lack a bit of that self-awareness, how do you actually tell what comments and criticisms people have of you are valid and things that you should take on board, and which ones are unfounded? Because there's been a lot of criticism when I'm reading comments on Reddit and Twitter and the Discord and all this kind of stuff. But if you don't have the self-awareness, it means you're actually not well equipped to make decisions about what comments are valid or aren't valid. And I don't just want to dismiss all of the comments and criticisms as invalid, because then that just makes you be even more delusional. But at the same time, I think there are a lot of criticisms that people have had of the last episode that aren't valid. But how do I tell? So it's been a very interesting, psychological experience, going through this. And I think at the end of the day, it's a good thing. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to do the show, because as I've gone through life, and so I had my birthday this past week, so I'm 38 years old now. So going into 38 years, I feel like in the past several years, I haven't had that many experiences where I've been challenged and can learn and grow. And so if anything, that's something that I'll get from this whole experience. So I'm trying to have a much more positive and better attitude about the whole thing, and not be quite as sensitive like I was last week. That being said, there has been a lot of criticism, and I think there will be moving forward as the game gets more serious and people are making more cutthroat decisions like this week. There'll be more criticism about the players and the production. So I think I'm sort of avoiding Reddit and Twitter as much as I can, because I find that those places are the places that tend to have the most negative and critical, but also the most ill-informed and less thoughtful comments about us and about the show. So yeah, it's becoming a little bit less fun engaging with those places, which is too bad, but understandable. And I also want to make sure that I'm not contributing to all of that, because even though I might have certain thoughts and perhaps some criticisms about how particular players might play an episode, or about how the production went and choices that were made around the games, ultimately, I stand by the fact that everyone playing the game played the best they could. And no one was going in there to play a bad game or to ruin the show. Like, people were doing the best that they could, myself included. And also the people making the games are doing the best they can. And there are some constraints and limitations that we're not aware of. Overall, I think the show is amazing. Like, we're 4 episodes in, we're halfway done with the show, and I'm loving it. I think it's a great show. And it's a really tall order to essentially recreate the Korean Genius game for a UK audience. So in a way, you have to try to appease the people who are sort of diehard fans of this Korean show. And I think the people making the show are also in that group. They're fans of the show. But you also have to make something for ITV that is going to appeal to more people, because ultimately this is a business as well. You can't make a show that only 2 people are going to watch. And how you straddle that line and keep that balance is really, really difficult. And I think that the production has done a really good job, in particular, designing the games. Like, sure, there might be some hits and misses. And perhaps the deathmatch this week was maybe on the miss side. But for the most part, the new games and deathmatches that they created, I think, were really good. And I think it's good that the games have mechanics where you have the potential to break them, because that's kind of what Genius Game is about. It's not about playing the game exactly by the book. It's about thinking laterally, thinking outside the box, and using all of the skills in your toolbox to get ahead. So I think that the show has gone really well so far, and I hope that people don't give up on it because I think it's a really good show. Yeah, last point is that, by the way, guys, when I make these slides, they look normal. Something about the platform I'm using, StreamYard, when I upload the slides, it sort of moves the pictures around a little bit, and sometimes it covers up the words. And to be honest, I'm just too lazy to go back and try to deal with fixing that because I spend so much time making the slides anyway. But for people wondering, when I do my teaching, I do not have slides that cover up the words. Yeah, so obviously seeing a social deathmatch in episode 4 did make me feel like I made the right choice last week because you want to avoid the deathmatch as much as you possibly can. There were some people commenting actually that Poker Face was a terrible deathmatch to have in the sense that it's a lot based on luck. And I agree with that. But obviously, I would even much worse want to have Tactical Rock, Paper, Scissors because I don't think it matters who I pick if I'm in the deathmatch last week. I'm going home if it's Tactical Rock, Paper, Scissors, like particularly after spending the whole episode trying to avoid the deathmatch and burning up my social capital. So I think it's unfortunate that anyone had to face this deathmatch, but it just shows how important avoiding the deathmatch is at all costs. And that's why people are playing the way they're playing. Some people aren't really playing as hard to win every single episode. They're playing to survive and to not get picked. And I think that's a perfectly valid strategy for the Genius. I want to give some shout outs. So there's a bunch of different podcasts and people producing content related to the show. And so if you're enjoying my recaps and you haven't checked out these things, then I just wanted to draw some attention to them. So Alex McMillan does the Dealer's Room podcast where they do a recap plus an exit interview with the person who's eliminated each week. And Alex was a producer on the show. So I really enjoy that podcast because you get that behind the scenes perspective from Alex, which is really, really interesting. Also, Rob Has a Podcast has been doing recaps and also separate exit interviews with Corey and Zach Wurtenberger. I have a few bones to pick with you guys. Actually, maybe not so much you guys, but the guests that you've had on. I feel like the guests recently have been extra critical of me. So, but that's fine. I mean, people have their opinions, and I really enjoy the Rob Has a Podcast recaps because Corey and Zach have both played social strategy games like this in Survivor and Big Brother, and the people that they have on to comment have also played these games before. So obviously Genius Game is a bit different, but there are a lot of similarities between Genius Game and these other types of social strategy competition shows. Naomi and Joshua have a podcast called Fighting, a Genius podcast, and they've been recapping the episodes. I love their recaps. Naomi and Joshua play LRGs, which stands for live reality games. So it's nerds like me who are obsessed with playing these kinds of games, and we just organize them ourselves, even if it's not recorded and necessarily filmed. Some of them are put on YouTube, actually, and they're really amazing. But yeah, Naomi and Joshua, I think, have some really good takes on the season, and I've really enjoyed listening to their recaps. There's also Tradar podcast. I think they normally cover traders, but they've been covering Genius Game as well. And David has been posting these really hilarious reels on Instagram where he takes moments from the show. So I've been enjoying that content from them. There's also Dom and Colin. They covered the original Korean show like 10 years ago, and they just a couple days ago put out a 2.5-hour recap of the first 3 episodes. And I was really nervous to listen to their recap because I really respect their opinions about the show and their analysis, but for the most part I felt like they were super nice and fair to me, which I mean I really appreciated, and I actually loved listening to their takes. So one of them is American, one of them is British, and I think that was really interesting because they had a bit of a conversation about American versus British audiences and what they're used to in terms of these strategy shows and what types of personalities might come across differently in different places. And I thought that was a really, really interesting and pertinent discussion. There's also Taryn Armstrong, who's done a lot of coverage for Rob Has a Podcast and watches the Big Brother live feeds. So he's been doing reactions and streams to the Genius Game. And then lastly, there's Charlotte from the show. She's doing streaming on Twitch. So last night, actually, I was in London and we got dinner together. We went and had delicious hot pot and talked about our lives in the show. It was really nice to see Charlotte. I love Charlotte. And then we went back to her flat and streamed the show together on Twitch. So that recording is available on her Twitch. Her Twitch is twitch.tv/MIKICHAR, Mickey Char. So that's where you can go to find Charlotte's recaps. And next week, she's going to be watching episode 5 and streaming it with Ken. So I'll definitely check that out. Last thing, before we get into episode 4, I also just wanted to shout out, if you are a fan of Genius Game UK, and this is your first foray into this kind of program, you should also check out Game of Blood or Bloody Game, which is online. It's a Korean show. I particularly recommend starting with season 2 and then watching season 3. It's very similar to the Korean Genius. There's also Devil's Plan on Netflix, which is currently airing its 2nd season, which is incredible. Love Devil's Plan. And then there's a whole bunch of these other kind of like Korean shows that are in a similar vein. And the one that I love the most personally is Crime Scene. If you are a fan of murder mysteries and escape rooms, then you will love Crime Scene. But basically, each episode is a new murder mystery. And the way that the contestants have to solve the murder mystery is by essentially doing an escape room where they search for clues related to the case. And they each play a suspect in the case. And they have to figure out which one of them is guilty for that particular episode. It's brilliant television. Highly recommend. Also, you can Google Beichu Squad, and they've got this website that helps you find where to watch these different programs. Cool. So let's get into episode 4. Before we started filming episode 4, and I talked about this last time, the producers came around to our dressing rooms and paid us a visit. And I only found out after the fact, after the show aired, that when they spoke to the other contestants, they were sort of telling people, yeah, look, we're in episode 4. Like, we need to, you need to really try to win and like play the game hard. So I think they were sort of giving people a slight kick in the rear to sort of get it in gear. I think they were nervous that no one had really opposed me in episode 3. So I think that's why you saw some players being a lot more active this episode, like Bedalia in particular. He had a battery in his back, like he was ready to trade and get going. And I think Amanfi too was ready to get going and get some trades. Something happened also behind the scenes that I'm not going to talk about, but there was something that happened that I noticed that was making me a little bit even more paranoid than normal. Like my paranoia reached a peak by episode 4. And I think it's a regret I have in the game because it also doesn't make me look good on TV. But it's also understandable. Like even I've heard people like queens from RuPaul's Drag Race talking about how in that situation, you just get so paranoid. You get paranoid at everything. And I think I'm somebody who's a bit paranoid in my real life in general. So I think it's only natural that you sort of get a bit paranoid in the game environment. Part of that is because this was the 4th day in a row that we were filming an episode. So I was exhausted. I think other people were tired as well and needed a break. And I think that's why this episode was the Bad Girls Club. Like it was a bit spicy. And actually they cut out some of the even spicier moments, which I was appreciative of. So you saw me and Indy walk into the show together. And actually when we were stood outside the set getting ready to walk in, we were whispering to each other, which we weren't really supposed to do. But I was telling her about the thing I had noticed the other day. And then Indy whispered to me something that she had noticed. And I knew that Indy was really clever and really smart and really paying attention in the game, which is what really drew me to her. But this was next level. So Indy told me that she had noticed on the floor of the set that there were little white stickers taped, like labels taped to the floor in different spots, and they had little initials on them. And so that day when we went inside, she pointed them out to me, and I hadn't noticed them before. But we realized that these little labels were to mark on the set where different pieces of the games needed to be installed. So for example, we found the little stickers that said ZG on it for zombie game. And that was the 4 stickers where the touch button went in the atrium. So basically they had planned out for all the main matches and death matches, each of the tables or the jail cell for the first game, like all that stuff had to be placed in a certain spot in the atrium. And they knew from their camera angles, like where they wanted everything to go. And so in order to make it easier to put it down, they marked it on the set. And so that was really cool because having watched all of the Korean show, of course, I knew a lot of the Korean main matches and death matches. And even though this show used some of those same games, they would call them something different. So for example, in the Korean show, the first death match was called Gulhap, but for us, it was same or different. But even so, I felt like there was a chance that we might have some main match or death match that had the same name as what it was called in the Korean show. So between Indy and I, basically, she was identifying the labels, and I was going around seeing if I could predict any future main matches or death matches based on the letters that were on the labels. So that's an interesting behind the scenes thing for you guys. Like, Indy was really paying attention to things, and that's I really love that about her because I was as well. So I think she and I working together were really trying to crack the code and get any advantage that we could moving forward. So my strategy for episode 4 was to repair my relationships. So I really didn't want to suggest any strategies for the game. I didn't want to dominate the game. I just wanted to sit back and really help the other players and support as many players as possible while avoiding the deathmatch. Also, that morning in episode 4, before we actually played the main match, we had some time, like we did each day, to have little talks and conversations with people. And as much as I possibly could, and this is devious, so the people who don't like it when you play the game, sorry, but I knew that I had a target on my back from the day before. So I was definitely trying to engineer the social dynamic in a way that would put heat on other people and take some heat off of me. So I remember talking to Amanfi and also talking to Charlotte and Indy and sort of trying to sort of exacerbate a bit of that tension that was going on between them. And I was also picking up on people were sort of nervous that the women were all going to team up against the guys. And so I definitely wanted to feed into that storyline as well, because to the extent that I could get Ken and Bedalia and Amanfi worried more about Charlotte and Indy and the women joining forces, then they would be focused less on me. And to the extent that the women were worried that the men might turn against them, they would be less focused on me. And I could sort of ride the middle in between these two factions. So a bit sneaky on my part, but we're here to play the game. And I knew that there was a target on my back. So I was definitely trying to manipulate the social interactions to my benefit. We finally get to see Indy's backstory, which is really cool. I loved Indy's backstory with her doing her statistics on her iPad. So it was really nice to finally see that. Okay, the main match begins, and I was so paranoid. Like I told you already, I was paranoid this day. I was paranoid about where we started, and we picked our suitcases. So basically, we were stood in our horseshoe pattern in the atrium when we watched the rules video. And then they paused, and we would go to the lounge, and then we got a rules briefing by the producer, and we got to ask questions. Then we came back to the atrium, and we had to stand in the same position that we were in when we watched the rules video. But this time they would say, okay, round 1 begins now. And then we could turn around and pick our boxes. So basically, I knew that the production knew the order we were going to be stood in, and then they put the boxes in the room. And so from my paranoid perspective, I can't be sure that those boxes are just randomly assigned, right? They know where we're all stood. And so if they wanted to, and I'm not suggesting that they did or they would, but in my mind, I was thinking if they wanted to, they could put these boxes in a way where they predict that we're all just going to take the one directly behind us. And then the game is sort of set up a certain way. And because I was so paranoid, I was nervous that they were going to try to give me the black cube to try to set me up and send me home. Now, taking a step back and looking at it with more perspective, I think the last thing that they wanted to do was give me the black cube because I dominated the first episodes. And so I think they did not want me to really be playing a big role. So I think actually I was fine. And it turns out actually that the black cube was in the case that was furthest away from where I was standing. So coincidence, I don't know. But in the end, it was fine. I don't think the producers wanted me to get that black cube. In the end, I was very happy with the suitcase I got because not only did I not have the black cube, but I also had no white cubes. And the reason I was happy about not having a white cube is that I knew people were going to try to collect the whites to get more garnets. And there's only 7 of them. So there's a lot more pressure if you have a white cube to trade it to somebody. And I did want to trade a cube if I could guarantee that I wasn't going to get the black cube in order to be helpful and to help someone win. But I was nervous. So I was glad that I did not have any whites or blacks. And I knew basically that I could take this game easy. Like I could take my box and go sit my ass down in the corner and just sit there. And I wouldn't have to trade with anybody and somebody could still win the game. Something that they didn't really show in the show is that we did get 5 seconds to look at our cubes when they were lit up. But as soon as we left the dealer room, we could run over under the stairs by the door to the atrium, and we could write down our colors. So we really only had to remember that information for like a few seconds, and then we could go write it down. So as soon as the game started, Charlotte, Ken, and Amanfi basically ran away to the bar. And I remember being really confused about that. I was confused that the 3 of them were working together, and also that Indy wasn't with them. And it turns out that Indy and Charlotte actually had a strategy that day not to work together, that they were specifically going to split up and try to work with other people because they had sort of been attached to the hip at that point in the game. But yeah, I was really confused about why they all ran off. And we sort of assumed that they were just going to see if they could get to 6 of cubes of some color amongst the 3 of them. And if they could, then they would try to win the game as fast as they could. If they couldn't get to 6 cubes, then they would come to us and they would need some help. So the rest of us went to the lounge, and then that's where we agreed to share our information, and Bex was going to take it all down into notes. So if it was any other day, I would have been the one taking the notes, or I would have taken notes in addition to Bex because I was obsessed with taking notes in the game. But because I was trying to lay low this episode, I was like, okay, people need to not see me caring about the game. They need to see me being chill, so we'll let Bex do it. The problem was that Bex couldn't remember one of her cubes. So she was a bit unsure about one of the cubes, whether it was green or red, I think. And when we were going around revealing our information, I can't remember exactly how it played out, but Indy gave her information and then sort of went back and was like, oh no, actually this cube is blue. And there was something where she had written down BL on her paper, but because she bobbled that answer when she told us it was blue, it made a lot of us think that BL actually stood for black instead of blue. So that is why Bedalia was so confident that Amanfi did not have the black cube, because I think a lot of us were genuinely convinced that Indy had the black because she was just being a bit suspicious when we revealed our information. So the results of round 1 got announced, and there were only 2 of each cube. Like that was the most that anyone had, was 2. And if we were being smart, and if I was being smart in that moment, we should have known immediately that Ken and Amanfi traded the black cube. Because if they traded a cube that was going to be helpful to one of them would have had 3 in some color. The fact that they still only had 2 suggests that somebody got the black. So that was a huge mistake on my part. A really bad move on my part that I didn't catch that, because I think the rest of the game could have played out a lot differently if I wasn't so worried and if other people weren't so worried about who had the black. Like if it was obvious at that point that either Ken or Amanfi had it, the rest of us could have freely traded without being so concerned about getting the black cube. So then they show the scene where Bex goes and talks to the other group, And she pulls out the paper, and Bedalia comes in the door, and he's like, "Are you sharing our information?" And she's like, "What? No, me? What? No, no, no. This paper, it's closed. I would never share this information." When I was with Charlotte last night on her stream, Charlotte confirmed that Bex did share the information. So the other team knew the colors that were in all of our boxes. So I'm really glad that they showed it this way, because then obviously when I came and confronted Bex, I was nervous that the show was going to paint this whole thing as like dominant, controlling, bossy boots Ben comes in and tells Bex that she can't have conversations with people. And then Bex says, "It's a game." But the reason I was upset wasn't because Bex was having conversations. It was because I knew that she was giving away our information. And it was just like Zombie Game, where she was giving away our information and she was collecting information for herself, but then she wasn't coming back to us to share the information. So all of this information brokering that Bex was doing was only for her benefit. And that is an excellent strategy. I'm not knocking that. And Bex was clever to play that way. However, if you are going to play that way and you're going to take my information and give it to other people, you can't be surprised when I have an issue with that, because I gave you my information in confidence and in trust. So you're not keeping my trust by giving my information to other people. And that was really all I was trying to say to Bex. And it wasn't just me, like the other people felt that way as well. Like I know Indy in particular also felt that, you know, why are we sharing our colors with you if you're just then going to go run and tell everyone else? So I think it was pretty fair, actually, the way they showed that whole confrontation. I think it was actually a bit worse in real life. Like I think I raised my voice a little bit more than what was shown there, or I may have said something else. I know there was a part where Bex was like, "That's not very kind, Benjamin." But I did feel a little bit justified then, having gone and seen the footage now, because she actually was sharing the information. I am really glad that they also showed me apologizing, because that was genuine. Like I genuinely felt bad that I had sort of raised my voice a bit, because it is just a game and there's no reason for it to actually get to that point where they actually raise their voice. To her credit, Bex has been like wonderful about this whole interaction, because she could have easily like really held a grudge against me like in real life. But that's not the case. Like she's actually come to my defense. Like when Basha was sort of implying or saying that I was bullying people last episode, like if anyone should feel bullied, it would be like Ken the last episode or Bex in this episode. And, you know, she really came to my defense in that aspect. And I really appreciate that about Bex, is that, you know, she's not a hypocrite in the sense that if she's telling me it's a game and that we all need to chill, she also didn't really take anything personally, which, you know, credit to her. I think she's been really fair about the whole thing in a way that I wouldn't have like expected that she would have to be that way. But yeah, I think the way that Bex and I approached the game was just different, because I tended to rely on my strategic abilities to navigate the game and keep myself safe, whereas Beck was relying on her social skills and abilities to manage all the relationships and keep herself safe. And I think both strategies are completely valid, and it shows different types of intelligence, because if I had an ounce of the social skills and charisma that Bex has, I would probably accomplish great things in my life because I desperately need those skills that she has. So yeah, we just didn't meld well in the game because of the different approaches that we had. I also wanted to point out that these suitcases were very heavy. Like I thought they were heavy, and I'm the biggest guy there. So I felt really bad for like Indy and Charlotte and Bex and Allison, like having to lug these like giant suitcases all over the place. And if we left them sitting somewhere and then walked away, we would get told off. So we had to keep them with us at all times, but they were actually really heavy. One thing that they didn't really explain in the rules was that at any time you could go to the dealer and lock in your suitcase. And if you locked in your case, they would open it and publicly reveal all of your colors. And then your case would get put on your stand and they would padlock it for the next round. So this actually became relevant later on, because I refused to trade my red cube to Indy for her to win unless she and I both locked in our suitcases. So I knew for a fact that neither of us had the black cube. And so we did that. And of course, they didn't show it, which is fine. Like it just added time to the game. But I was so paranoid about getting the black cube that I only traded with Indy once we publicly revealed. It's an interesting mechanic, though, because somebody could have, I think Zach mentioned this in the Rob Has a Podcast thing as well. You could have all just said in the very first round, let's all lock in our suitcases and then we'll see who has the black cube and just ice that person out. I think the reason you wouldn't do that then is because it would put a target on whoever made that strategy because it's quite aggressive. But yeah, there definitely was a concern on my end when I was reading the rules that if too many people played the game like I was going to play, no one would trade and then no one would win. So I was really nervous actually about how the game was going to end if people just weren't really trading and it was taking too long. And they sort of told us that there was some kind of contingency plan if the game was taking too many rounds and that they would tell us later. But I wanted to know now so that I knew the strategy of the game, because I knew that my strategy was going to be to not trade, to keep myself out of the death match. And so I was concerned about what would happen if the game took too long and other people weren't trading, like if it might backfire in some way, but we weren't really told what would happen. Luckily, I think we just about got to the point where they were going to implement some kind of contingency plan, but luckily Indy was able to win at that point. And I think that was probably one of the reasons why I traded with her in the end, was because we could lock in and guarantee I wouldn't get the black. I would also come across being quite helpful to Indy when obviously she was annoyed at how the code names went, and it could end the game. There was more of a conflict between Bedalia and Amanfi. I don't think I was there for it, but people have referenced this like argument that they had in the hallway where things got a little bit heated. But I think the show left that out, which was interesting. I was also really surprised by Allison's revenge against Amanfi by locking his case. It was interesting because I thought Allison was actually in a decent position to win this game and go after the blues, which was interesting. So I think she must have been quite annoyed actually at Amanfi and was defending Bedalia quite a lot in order to lock his case. What they didn't show is that there was other locking of the cases as well. So at one point, Amanfi locked Indy's case to try to stop her from winning and delay the game a bit more so that he could figure out what to do. And in retaliation, Indy then spent the next round locking Amanfi's case. And it's really a shame that they didn't show this, because actually Amanfi's strategy towards the end of the game was to get the black cube back from Bedalia, because Amanfi actually wanted to take Charlotte to the death match. And he realized that he would rather get the black cube back himself and then challenge the person that he wanted to challenge rather than getting pulled into the death match against Bedalia. And so had Indy not locked Amanfi's case, there's a really good chance actually that Bedalia gives him back the black cube and then Amanfi picks Charlotte for the death match. Indy didn't know that. It was just sort of a random thing that she locked Amanfi's case, sort of in retribution because he locked hers. But I think there's a decent chance that her doing that actually saved Charlotte from going to the death match, which is really interesting. But yeah, the other thing I wanted to say is that I think the way that Bedalia reacted to getting the black cube and the way that Allison reacted by locking Amanfi's case, I think it's an example of how I think the meta feeling in the group was that even if you lie in the games because of some role that you've been given that sort of forces you to lie, like being a zombie or having the black cube or being the undercover agent, that there were some people in the game who weren't going to be completely forgiving of that. And so there was definitely a feeling that if you are going to be dishonest and if you're going to lie, that there is a cost to that. And I think that's why people like me and Charlotte, when we got those roles, we played it a lot more upfront by just telling people that we had those roles. And obviously there's some criticism online that makes the game less interesting and we should play the game the way that it's designed. But I would argue that that is the way the game is designed. Like the game is designed so that the players have agency to make different choices about their strategy. and to play the games in different ways. And I think that's actually the whole point of Genius Game, because otherwise we could just sit around and play a board game that has very defined specific rules where you can't really deviate and do anything creative. But I think you're seeing now some of the dynamic in the group that Charlotte and I were picking up on, which is that there definitely was a premium for being honest in the game. Okay, so the deathmatch. I had a lot of feelings as soon as this was revealed, because I knew right away, obviously, that it was a social deathmatch and that basically we had the power to essentially send one of them home. If we could all agree, then we would all send one of them home, and that person would have absolutely no chance to do anything about it. On one hand, I felt a lot of relief that this deathmatch, that I wasn't in the deathmatch, because I was pretty confident that I would be the target no matter who I was there with. I also felt some vindication about my strategy the day before, playing so aggressively, because this is why you want to avoid death matches at all costs. I also felt a little bit of frustration that we had this kind of death match. And again, I want to be really careful not to be overly critical of the producers and the games team, because there are other ways that this game plays out. But I think that the players who were making the decision did do sort of the logical thing and sort of taking the power into our hands, even though it didn't feel very good. I think what I found really difficult about this decision was that I had deals, quote unquote, or an alliance or a relationship with both Bedalia and Amanfi. So it wasn't the case where it was an easy, straightforward decision for me. It was really difficult to decide who to support. And for me, it wasn't the case that I had reasons to distrust Amanfi. Like some of the other people didn't trust him because of how he interacted with them in the games. For me, it was actually the opposite. Like I had a reason to trust him because he could have solved the word extinguished in the last game, and he didn't. So it was really brutal to go against Amanfi in that moment. But it was a moment in the game where I felt like I had to prioritize my strategy and playing the game over my emotions. And earlier in the game, like in episode 2, for example, when I offered my Garnet to try to save Allison, if this happened earlier in the game, I don't know that I would have made the same decision. But by this point, I was feeling paranoid, and I think I was at the point where I was turning off my emotional side, and I was just going to play a bit more cutthroat and aggressively. And I think you saw that from a number of people, because Charlotte, for example, played this really well, because I think Charlotte knew that Amanfi was going to go after her, because I'm pretty sure that if he was in the deathmatch, he would have picked Charlotte. So Charlotte taking a stand and saying, no, I don't think we should all just make an individual decision. She sort of steered that deliberation in a way that really benefited her, because it allowed us to take out the person that she was sort of threatened by and in contention with. I think that other people are also playing the game as well. And I don't say this as a criticism. I say it as a compliment. But, you could see that Bex and Ken, for example, I think were the people who would be most likely to support Amanfi, either because of the social bond that they had or because Ken is the one who gave him the cube in the first place. But actually, you see that all of us are playing the game now. I think we all recognize that Amanfi was a stronger player, and we were a bit more threatened by his ability to strategize and play the game compared to Bedalia. And that's ultimately what caused us to make the decision that we did. And, I think it's nothing but respect to Amanfi. He got taken out because he was the bigger threat. I think for me at least, there was absolutely nothing personal in that. And I think that's true for the vast majority of players. But, it's interesting because people's criticism so far of the show, some people have criticized people for not being aggressive enough, people just letting me win in the last episode. But actually, you see in this deathmatch that people's claws are starting to come out. And I think as we get deeper into the game, people are going to be playing a lot more aggressively and a lot more for their own benefit, rather than just trying to keep things calm with everyone. So I also just want to comment just about Amanfi in particular. Like, I know a lot of people are really upset that he's gone from the show, and I think the show is really going to miss his presence, because I think he single-handedly saved the zombie game episode by playing the way he did. I think Amanfi was a really smart player, a really strategic player, a really entertaining player. He brought so much to the show, and I think I'm sad that he's gone. But I think more importantly from all of that, Amanfi is just a really, really good, wonderful, incredibly amazing person in real life. And I think, like, I was crying on Charlotte's stream last night, so I'm sure I'm going to cry in this one too. But for me, there are people that you meet in your life who inspire you to be a better person because of how they live their life. And for me, Amanfi is one of those people. I just really can't say enough good things about him. Like, I think that he had every right to be really upset at us, to be upset at the situation that he was in. And not once in the time that he was there and in the year, over a year since then, has he really expressed those kind of feelings, even though I think it would be totally justifiable for him to do that and to feel that way. He's just such a really gracious person, and really kind. And and there were sort of things that happened behind the scenes as well, where I think Amanfi could have felt a certain way about me, maybe about other people, and had maybe a grudge, and would have been totally justified. And he hasn't been that way at all. He also gave this speech in the death match that was really, really beautiful, where even when he knew that he was losing and that we had all ganged up on him, they were talking about what makes a genius. And he talked about how a genius is somebody who transcends expectations. And I can't remember word for word what he said, but in that moment, to be ganged up on and to know that you're going home and that you can't do anything about it, for him to say the things that he was saying and to be that vulnerable, and in that moment, my heart broke. And I don't want to be hypocritical. Like, I stand by the choice I made. I think it was the right choice to target Amanfi because he was the stronger player. But god damn, did it suck. And it still sucks now. Like, I feel so guilty about it, because had Amanfi guessed Extinguish in the last game, I don't think he plays Lights Out the same way that he played it. I think if he won the last game, he knows that he burned some bridges with people, and then he does what I do in Lights Out and doesn't trade and avoids the black box. So it's possible that whoever does get the black box still picks him for the death match. But obviously his chances of ending up in the death match this episode are a lot lower if he guesses the code word in the last episode. So I do feel really guilty about the way that he went out. And I stand by it, and it's a compliment to Amanfi, but gosh, does it really suck, because it couldn't have happened to a better person. I also put a little picture here of this necklace. So Amanfi made these necklaces for everyone on the cast, with the little G. And it's like one of the things I treasure the most from this whole experience, because it's something that reminds me of the show and this really cool experience that we all had. But it's also, for me, a reminder of how wonderful Amanfi is, that even in that situation where he was targeted by us and he was eliminated without a chance to really save himself, that he was still that kind and generous, that he made something like this to give to all of us. So I think, yeah, I just really like Amanfi. And I think I would encourage everyone, instead of posting, like, a lot of negative criticism about maybe the game or the show, like, go send him a positive message. I don't think he needs it. I'm not saying that he's like really upset or something, but I just think what Amanfi would do is to be positive. And so I think he would appreciate people sending him a positive message, how much you enjoyed him on the show, how great he was on the show, because Yeah, I think he was. And I think, yeah, having a friendship with Amanfi is something that I will take away from this experience. And I think it's a really valuable thing. Okay. Everyone's going to drag me for crying now. Let's go. Whew. Okay, surprises from this episode. I was completely shocked when they started playing Extreme Ways. So for people who don't know, that's an iconic song, Moby Extreme Ways, that they played in the Korean show whenever people had these like brilliant, big genius moments, and they would play Extreme Ways at that time. So I think them doing it in this moment of Amanfi losing the death match, on one hand, felt really weird because it's not actually the kind of moment that they would have used Extreme Ways in the Korean show. But at the same time, I feel like they did it as like a respect thing for Amanfi. Like, so I don't interpret that as sort of like celebrating Badalia's win. I interpret it as acknowledging the player that Amanfi was in the game, that he got this iconic song played at the moment where he was leaving. So I think that they sort of did that as a show of respect for him. Oh yeah, they also didn't really show the full extent, I think, of the confrontation with Bex. I don't remember exactly all of it, but I think there was probably a bit more. Let's see. I also talked about how, yeah, Indy and I locked our suitcases before we traded the last cubes. Amanfi did try to get the black cube back so that he could pick Charlotte for the death match. And I also told you, I think I've covered a lot of this, that Indy was really sus in the beginning. Oh, also something that happened that was really funny. So at one point, Indy and Amanfi went to the table to swap cubes. And the rules for swapping the cubes was that you could only touch one cube, the one that you were going to swap, and you had to pick it up and sort of set it on the table. But what Indy tried to do was look like she was reaching for one cube, but then actually move it and then pick up a different one from her suitcase. And the dealer caught her doing the switcheroo and said, Indy, you can't swap your blocks. Like, you have to only trade with the one you're touching. And a bunch of us were watching this happen. And I remember thinking, like, she's definitely got the black cube. Like, why is she trying to switch around these cubes when she's trading if she's not doing anything suspicious with the black? It turned out she didn't have the black cube at all. And I think she was just trying to maybe trade one to Amanfi that he didn't actually need, but to get one that she needed herself. But yeah, it was a really hilarious moment. And I wish they would have showed it in the show. It also shows how clever Indy is. Like, she's constantly looking for these ways to make the most of the situation. Charlotte said last night that Amanfi was actually doing the same thing in that moment and trying to swap what cube he was doing. So, but I only remember Indy doing it and getting caught for it. Okay. I considered taking out this pyramid thing because I feel like it's a little bit hypocritical for me to get a bit sensitive about what people are saying about me, but then for me to literally rank the cast each episode. But I want to keep it in just because I think it's a nice way to sort of summarize what people have done each episode. But I want to acknowledge that just because I personally put someone higher or lower on the pyramid, like, it's not an indication of how I think they are as a player in the game or as a person. Like, it's literally just a representation of who I think has done particularly well that episode, and if they're in a place to do well moving forward based on how they played. So that being said, I put Badalia first because I think Badalia was a bit inspired today to be really active. But I think, like, in one of his confessionals, he said, I don't really care where the black cube is. I just have to make sure I don't get it because I'm trying to go for the white cubes and go for the win. But obviously you do have to care where the black cube is, because if you don't know where the black cube is, you're more likely to get it traded to you. So I think maybe he was a bit too gung-ho in trading and then got stuck with the black cube, and maybe could have done a slightly better job trying to offload the black cube. But it's a hard game, right? If you're going for the win, you're going to have to trade. And when you trade, there's a chance you're going to get the black. So I think it's a risky game by definition. And I think that's why people like me and Charlotte didn't really trade. I put myself next to be completely fair and to try to not be delusional about my own performance. Obviously, I missed the fact that the black cube got traded in round 1 when they said that the majority colors only had 2. Like, I should have known right away that the black was traded, and I didn't. So that was a really dumb mistake on my part. And I also picked a fight with Bex this episode, which really didn't need to happen. Like, I could have had my feelings about Bex and not trusted her without necessarily having this big blow up and damaging that relationship. So while I did do a good job, I think, in sort of lowering my profile and building relationships with other people this day, I definitely did not make progress and made things worse with Bex, and that was not a good move on my part. I put Amanfi next just because he did find his way getting picked into the deathmatch, but I don't actually think Amanfi could have really done all that much different this episode, other than just not trading with Ken in the beginning, or maybe trying to give the black cube to someone else other than Bedalia, who wouldn't have such an axe to grind. But the problem is that I think Allison would have also had an axe to grind if he gave it to her. Charlotte and I weren't trading. He wouldn't want to give it to Bex because they were really tight. So the only person left is Indy, really. And maybe that's what he was trying to do, is give Indy the black cube when they were trading in that one time. I can't remember. But yeah, I think he was in a really, really tough spot. And I think he played it just about as well as he could. I think it was hard to predict that Bedalia would get so upset getting the black cube and would just drag both of them to the deathmatch. I put Bex next because I think you can see people are starting to realize her game of playing all the sides. And, she was certainly on my radar as somebody that I couldn't trust. So I think in trying to develop relationships with everyone, there comes a point where you might end up actually spreading yourself too thin. And then people start to wonder, well, who is she actually most loyal to? And so I had definitely gotten to that point this episode. But fair play to Bex, because she got the token of life, which turned out to be meaningless. It was actually a really clever play on Indy's part to give Bex the token of life, because I think Bex thought that was a really important gesture and it meant something to her, when actually Bex had no danger of going to the deathmatch anyway. So that was well played on Indy's part. I think Allison probably could have won this main match if she was a little bit more aggressive and tried to get some blue cubes from people. Did I have blues in my starting? I don't think I did, but maybe I did. I did have a blue. Okay. So yeah, I had a blue cube in my suitcase. So I think I would have been willing to trade Allison that blue cube, but I don't remember her ever really, pushing me to do that, because I was willing to trade my red to Indy. I would have traded my blue to Allison as well. I put Charlotte next just because I felt Charlotte played a really smart strategy of never trading. Like, Charlotte didn't make a single trade the whole game. It kept her out of the deathmatch. And then when it came time to deliberating for the deathmatch, she was one who pushed the idea that we should all band together and basically target Amanfi. And I think that really benefited her to eliminate someone who was a threat to her game. So again, more clever play from Charlotte, not sticking out too much, but sort of controlling things in a way that benefited her while maintaining a low profile. So Indy and Ken are at the top. I think they both had really, really good episodes, but I put Indy second. And the only reason I put Indy second is because I actually think that Ken played a brilliant episode, because he started with the black cube. And despite giving Amanfi the black cube, and then also not supporting Amanfi in the deathmatch, and also he knew that Bedalia had the black cube, but didn't really tell Bedalia that Bedalia had the black cube. So Ken was playing this game, and he played it really well and strategically, but somehow there was no heat on him after this game. Like, everyone was so concerned with Bedalia and Amanfi, and then also Bex and I having our disagreement and people being mad at me for the day before. So despite playing this game quite aggressively and having to, because he had the black cube, no one was really looking at Ken. So I thought he did a really, really good job of managing quite a tricky position with that black cube. But Indy also had a fantastic episode. She's won 2 main matches now out of the 4 that we've had. So, I mean, she's not been getting that much screen time, but has been playing the game really, really well and sort of navigating the relationships and the games in a way where she seems to be coming out ahead every single time. Okay, my Kim Kyung-rin Queen of the Episode award goes to Indy. And that's because of the thing with the stickers on the floor. Like, I was completely blown away when she told me that. I hadn't noticed it. And I think it just shows an awareness of observation and really paying attention to everything in your surroundings in this game to try to get any advantage that you can. So I was really impressed by that. I thought it's really fierce that she noticed all of that. So yeah, Indy had an excellent episode with her 2nd win. So well done to Indy. So to wrap up, my strategy going into episode 5, I really needed a break. So actually, after these first 4 days, we finally got a rest. So all of us who were still in the game, the 7 of us left, got to have a down day where we just got to relax, and then we could come back to episode 5. So it felt nice to make that first milestone. At the same time, there was a lot of, on my end, like thinking about how are we actually going to go from 7 players down to 2? And I was really anxious about that. So I knew that in these next couple of episodes, something was going to happen where a bunch of people were going to be eliminated. And so I was really nervous about how the next few episodes were going to go. My goal was to try to survive as long as I could without ever seeing a death match, because so far it had been working for me. So, you know, I made it the first 4 episodes without ever seeing a death match, and seeing the social one really made me want to commit to that, because there was no guarantee anymore about what these death matches were going to be. And the only way to ensure that you survive to the next episode is to never go to the death match. So yeah, and I was also practicing some of the death matches that I brought with me from home, so that in case I did go in, that I was as prepared as I could have possibly been. So yeah, thanks everyone for watching the video. I am going to try to still read the comments and stuff. But yeah, I appreciate all of the support. Like, I think people were way nicer and supportive than they had to be last episode. Like, I think I was a bit delusional about all of that, but I'm just a person, and I'm doing my best trying to navigate this whole experience and trying to be as open and honest about all of it as I can be. So yeah, I hope you stick with the show, and I'll be back next week for the recap on episode 5. Bye.